The room fell silent when the little girl's wheelchair rolled past the crowd of children playing tag. No one looked at her, until a stranger knelt down, smiled, and said 6 simple words that changed everything. "My daughter would love to play with you." What happened next made even the CEO watching from the corner wipe her eyes. Stay with us, because this true-to-life story will remind you how one act of kindness can heal more than a broken body. And if stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and tell us in the comments what hope means to you. By late afternoon, the therapy garden behind North Lake Children's Hospital in Seattle glowed with a soft, winter-week sun, the kind that dusted the hedges in silver and made the wind chimes sound like distant church bells. Jake Miller nudged the gate with his shoulder, hands full of a cedar crate, and let his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, dart through first. The crate was heavier than it looked. A menagerie of small wooden animals, a puzzle board with oversized pegs, 2 wind-up flowers he'd carved with tiny gears and a crank that made them bloom, and a low, wheeled balance board with a curved handle formed to a child's grip. "Slow," he said, but he was smiling. Lily moved like sunlight did, fast, unafraid, finding cracks in every shadow. They were there to donate the toys to the pediatric rehab wing. When Lily spotted the girl by the window, she stopped as if her shoes had caught on a thread. The girl sat in a slim wheelchair tucked into the corner where the planter boxes met the glass. She had dark hair smoothed into a careful ponytail and a cardigan that looked too clean, too new, like a gift that didn't know the child who wore it. Her right hand lay quiet in her lap, the left angled in a way that suggested effort even in stillness. She watched everything without letting anything touch her. The name stitched on the blanket over her knees read Olivia. "Daddy," Lily whispered, fingers tightening in the cuff of his flannel. "Can she play with me?" Jake followed her gaze. He'd learned to read rooms the way he read grain, where the splinters waited, where the lines wanted to go, where pushing would only crack the board. He took a breath. The garden held a few other families, an orderly with a bubble wand, a grandmother coaxing a toddler across foam stepping stones. But in the far doorway stood a woman in a charcoal suit, posture straight as a rule. He recognized her face from billboards on I-5 and business segments that played muted at the hardware store. Victoria Carter, CEO of Harrington Systems, the tech conglomerate whose name was on half the city. She was not smiling. Jake set the crate on a bench and crouched to Lily's height. "We can ask," he said. "We ask with our kindest voice, and if she says no, we honor it." Lily nodded solemnly, like he'd just handed her a mission. They approached slowly, Jake keeping his palms open. A carpenter's quiet offered like proof he meant no harm. "Hi," he said to Olivia, eyes level, not drifting to the chair, not to the scar that traced like a quiet river along the inside of her wrist. "I'm Jake. This is my daughter, Lily. We brought a few things for the kids to try. Would you like to see them?" Olivia's gaze flicked to Lily, then back to the glass, as if conversation were a corridor with doors she wasn't sure she remembered how to open. Before the silence could harden, Lily leaned forward and set a wooden bird on the blanket. It was simple and lovely. Wings sanded satiny, a tiny beak, a tail that clicked when you tapped it. "He's shy too," Lily confided, as if telling the bird's secret could make room for Olivia's. "But he likes sunlight. He's braver in sunlight." Something eased in Olivia's mouth. Not a smile exactly. More like a muscle remembering a job it used to do. Jake wound one of the flowers and set it in the square of sun that pooled by the window. The petals lifted, gear by gear, until the bloom stood open, catching light in its carved veins. "Sometimes," he said conversationally, "movement is hiding in there, waiting for the right invitation." The woman in the doorway crossed the paving stones to them, her heels quiet on the rubberized path. that corporate calm a little too tight around the eyes. "I'm Victoria Carter," she said, offering a hand Jake didn't take right away because his were occupied with the crank. She noticed and lowered her arm, not offended, only more alert. "Olivia's mother," she added, and then, with a flicker of something human in her voice, "Thank you for the toys. Our therapy team appreciates community support." "They're for playing," Lily corrected gently, then turned to Olivia. "Would you like to make the flower bloom? You can try with your left hand, or I can help with mine, and we can do it together." Jake felt Victoria watch him the way people sometimes watched a stray dog near a playground, wary, assessing, as if past experience had taught her that kindness carried ruin folded inside. He didn't blame her. He'd seen what grief did, how it put bars around what you loved and called it safety. He nodded to Olivia, nothing urgent in it, just an offer that didn't expire. "My daughter would love to play with you," he said, the words quiet and clear enough to fit through the smallest opening. A breeze threaded the chimes. On the other side of the window, clouds parted, watercolor blue showing through. Olivia lifted her left hand. The effort showed in her shoulder first, a tremor like a bird remembering flight, then in the elbow, then finally the fingers, stiff but determined, closing over the crank. Lily's hand covered hers, small over small, and they turned it together. The petals rose. The sound it made was a tiny, satisfied click, as if the flower approved of its own courage. Olivia's eyes tracked the bloom. Her mouth softened again, and this time the curve held, unmistakable. A smile not performed for adults, not coaxed by a therapist's sticker chart, but born of motion and light and a child's simple company. Jake didn't cheer, didn't make it a spectacle. He let the moment be ordinary, which in rooms like this was the most radical thing you could do. Victoria's inhale was almost a sound. Her hand had gone to her throat, as if checking that breath still worked. Close up, the polish of her CEO mask couldn't hide the wreckage behind it. The sleepless nights, the inventory of what-ifs, the ledger of guilt. She looked at Jake as if asking what he wanted in exchange for this, and Jake, without glance or gesture, made it plain. Nothing. "We'll bring more next week," he said, casual as if talking about spare screws, as if the world hadn't shifted half an inch on its axis. "If Olivia wants." He included Olivia in the decision with his eyes, then backed them out of the circle so the girls could set the rhythm themselves. As he lifted the crate, Lily's laughter pealed, bright, unafraid, and Olivia answered with a small, breathy giggle that sounded like a door being unlatched. Victoria stood very still. In the glass he could see her reflection. Woman, mother, executive, all the roles she'd used to armor herself, waver like heat above asphalt. When he and Lily reached the gate, Jake glanced back. Olivia had her palm pressed to the sun-warmed petal, as if memorizing its shape. Victoria's eyes had gone wet, and fear was threaded through the shine. Not fear of him, he understood, but of hope itself. He knew that fear. Hope meant the possibility of losing again. He tipped the brim of an imaginary cap, an old habit from job sites where gratitude came in gestures more than words. Victoria's jaw worked, once, twice. Then, very slightly, she nodded. It was the smallest treaty. It was everything. The next morning, Victoria Carter sat in her office atop the 42nd floor of Harrington Tower, watching the city wake beneath her. The skyline gleamed with the same glassy perfection she'd built her life upon. Efficient, unbending, controlled. Yet all she could see was the image of her daughter's hand turning that carved wooden flower, and the man kneeling beside her, speaking to Olivia as though she wasn't broken. That image had followed her through the night like the sound of an unanswered question. Victoria had spent months trying to fix things the way she fixed companies, with money, with plans, with measurable progress. Since the accident, every hour of Olivia's care had been scheduled, every therapist vetted, every machine state-of-the-art. And still her daughter hadn't smiled, until that man and his little girl appeared with their handmade toys and uninvited warmth. She hated how that unsettled her. It wasn't supposed to work that way. Not after everything she'd done to keep Olivia safe. The knock on the door made her start. Her assistant stepped in with the morning reports, but Victoria waved her off. She needed air more than numbers. Outside, the December chill bit through her coat, but she welcomed it. At least cold made sense. She walked without deciding where to go and somehow ended up at North Lake again. Through the therapy garden's glass wall she saw them. Jake in his worn denim jacket, sleeves rolled, showing the girls how to sand the edge of a wooden board. Olivia sat on a stool beside Lily, her concentration fierce, her tongue caught between her teeth. Their laughter came faint through the glass, soft but steady, like something that had been asleep too long, finally remembering its rhythm. Victoria didn't go in. She stayed where she was, one hand on the glass, watching the man who had done in minutes what an army of specialists could not. Later, she told herself it was coincidence when she ran into them again, at the cafe near the hospital. Jake and Lily sat at a corner table, sketching designs for new toys on napkins. Lily waved when she saw her. "Miss Victoria, we're making a birdhouse for the therapy garden." Jake looked up, polite surprise in his eyes. "Good morning," he said. "Coffee's on us if you don't mind it strong." She hesitated. CEOs didn't sit with strangers in greasy work jackets. Yet she did. Maybe because it had been so long since anyone had spoken to her without pretense or agenda. They talked about small things, wood types, weather, Seattle's endless rain, and it felt strangely easy. He told her he used reclaimed lumber, giving discarded wood a second life. She thought of Olivia and said quietly, "I suppose that's what you do for people too." He looked at her then, really looked, and the honesty in his eyes made her want to look away. "I just listen," he said. "Sometimes that's all someone needs." It was such a simple sentence, and yet it left her throat tight. Later that week, when Victoria visited the hospital again, she found Olivia in the activity room with Jake and Lily. They were engraving words into a smooth cedar plank, HOPE. Jake guided both girls' hands with patient steadiness, letting Olivia feel the vibration of the carving tool against her palm. The word emerged slowly, uneven but beautiful, the letters warm under the light. For the first time since the crash, Victoria saw her daughter's face fully alive, eyes bright, cheeks flushed. She caught herself crying before she realized she'd begun. "Olivia," she whispered, "you're moving your hand." Jake looked up and nodded softly. "Sometimes," he said, "healing starts when someone believes you can." The doctors confirmed it later that day. Small muscle activity, unexpected but promising. The medical team called it a breakthrough. Victoria knew better. It was connection. That night, alone in her penthouse, she opened a drawer she hadn't touched in months. Inside were the shattered remains of the porcelain music box from the accident, the one that used to play her late husband's favorite tune. She'd kept it as proof of how fragile things were. Now she found herself thinking of wood instead, sturdy, imperfect, able to be mended. She wondered what it might mean to let someone like Jake near those fractures. She wasn't ready to trust him, or anyone, not yet. But the image of her daughter laughing beside that rough-handed craftsman had rooted somewhere deep inside her. The next day, she called the hospital to extend Olivia's sessions and asked, without quite knowing why, if the volunteer woodworker might come again. That afternoon, Jake received the message while repairing a neighbor's porch. Lily twirled beside him, humming. "Does that mean we can go back, Daddy?" she asked. He smiled, brushing sawdust from her hair. "Yeah, kiddo," he said. "Looks like we're not done building hope just yet." When they returned to the garden the following week, Victoria was already there. This time she didn't stand apart. She knelt beside Olivia, her manicured hands resting on the rough wood, and for the first time in a long time, she let someone else show her how to listen. A week later, Victoria Carter found herself standing in front of a weathered sign that read Miller Woodworks, tucked behind an old gas station on the outskirts of Seattle. The workshop smelled of cedar and rain, the kind of scent that clung to memory. She had told herself she was coming to thank Jake properly for what he'd done for Olivia. But gratitude wasn't the only thing driving her. Something about him unsettled her calm, as if he held a mirror to the parts of herself she'd ignored. Jake looked up from the bench where he was sanding a chair leg, sawdust dusting his forearms. "Didn't expect the CEO herself," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You found the place easy enough?" "Your directions were unconventional," she said, glancing around. The shop was modest but alive, every surface carrying evidence of use, of patience. On one shelf sat a row of wooden toys identical to the ones Lily and Olivia played with. "This is where you make them?" "Here and in the garage," he said. "Depends on whether the rain gets inside that week." She watched him for a moment, then spoke before she could lose her nerve. "You used to work for Harrington Systems." He paused. "That's right." "In design and ergonomics," she added quietly. "You were one of the employees let go during the downsizing, the year I took over." Jake set down the chair leg, brushed the dust from his hands, and leaned against the table. "Guess that explains why your face looked familiar," he said gently. "Don't worry. I'm not holding it against you. Losing that job gave me time to be a father." His words were simple, but they pierced deeper than accusation. She opened her mouth to apologize but couldn't find language that didn't sound transactional. "It wasn't personal," she murmured. "It never is," he replied, not unkindly. For a long moment they stood in the quiet hum of the shop, sawdust swirling in a thin shaft of light from the window. Then Lily's laughter broke the stillness. She was showing Olivia a small birdhouse, its roof painted unevenly, the colors bleeding together in joyful chaos. "We're making a video, Mommy," Lily shouted. "It's called Hope Garden. We're telling people to send letters or art for kids like Olivia so nobody feels alone." Victoria blinked. "Mommy?" Jake smiled. "Lily assumes every adult with a kind face must be somebody's parent. She's generous like that." The two girls giggled as they worked, filming with a borrowed phone propped on a paint can. Victoria watched, struck by how natural they looked together. For the first time in years, Olivia's laugh filled a space without breaking it. Later, while the girls played, Jake poured coffee into chipped mugs. "Lily's idea," he said, nodding toward the camera. "She said Olivia shouldn't be just someone people feel sorry for. She wanted her to be the one inspiring others." Victoria felt a lump in her throat. "She's right." Then her gaze caught on something small, a wooden bracelet on Olivia's wrist. It was carved from a single piece of dark walnut, smooth as silk, with a faint burned mark near one edge. Victoria frowned. "Where did you get that?" Olivia glanced up. "Mr. Jake gave it to me," she said softly. "He said it's made from a special kind of wood that's been through fire but didn't break." Victoria reached out, fingertips trembling as they traced the scar on the grain. She knew that wood. It was the same material as the interior paneling of the SUV from the accident, the one that had trapped Olivia before firefighters cut her free. Her pulse quickened. "Jake," she whispered, "how did you get that piece?" He hesitated. "The night of the storm, about a year ago, there was a crash on the I-90 bridge. I was driving home with Lily. We saw the wreck before emergency crews arrived. I pulled over. The car was on fire. I managed to open the back door and pull a little girl out before the fuel caught." He met her gaze then, voice quiet but steady. "I never knew her name. Until now." The room blurred. Victoria gripped the work table, breath hitching. "You saved my daughter." Jake looked away, uncomfortable with the weight of her stare. "Anyone would have." "No," she said, tears rising despite herself. "Not anyone." She saw it all at once. The stranger who had vanished before she could thank him. The charred fragments of wood in her hand that day. The reason her child was still alive. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because that night wasn't about me," he said simply. "And you didn't need another ghost haunting you." For a long time, neither spoke. Outside, rain began to fall, steady and cleansing, pattering against the tin roof. Olivia wheeled closer, sensing her mother's silence. She took Victoria's hand and placed it on the wooden bracelet. "It's warm," she whispered, "like sunshine." Victoria knelt, gathering her daughter into her arms, shaking with quiet sobs. Jake turned away, giving them privacy, but the sound still filled the small shop like prayer. When Victoria finally stood, her face was pale but resolute. "You saved her twice," she said. "Once from the fire, and again from herself." Jake shook his head. "You did the hard part. You stayed." She looked at him then, not as a CEO, not as a woman measuring debts, but as a mother seeing a man who understood loss. "Maybe," she said softly, "we both did." That evening, when she drove home, the bracelet glowed faintly in the dashboard light. The burned mark catching gold, as if the fire that once tried to destroy it had learned to shine instead. 2 months later, the glass atrium of Harrington Tower glimmered like a lantern against Seattle's wet dusk. Cameras clustered at the velvet ropes, microphones bristling like winter grass. Banners arced overhead, future motion, a new way forward, though the true center of the evening was a small cedar platform built at knee height, its edges rounded and sanded the way Jake liked to finish anything that would touch a child's hands. Beyond the stage, an exhibit of prototypes ringed the space. Adjustable grips, low-resistance cranks, modular splints that snapped into place with satisfying clicks. On one table sat a compact device Jake had designed in his shop. The companion key, a palm-sized lever housed in walnut, fitted with micro-servos that smoothed the torque curve for weak muscles. Victoria moved through the lobby with a different carriage than the one billboards knew. The CEO tailoring still fit, but something in her posture had softened. Less armor, more center. When she reached the lectern, the low roar subsided to the respectful hush of people expecting announcements about money. What they got instead was a mother. "Good evening," she began, voice steady. "For months after the accident, my daughter sat alone in rooms surrounded by the most advanced equipment I could buy, and she did not smile. Then 2 people walked into her day with nothing to sell, just a wooden bird, a flower, and an invitation." Cameras angled toward Jake and Lily at the front row. Lily, in a simple blue dress, held Olivia's hand beneath the armrest like they were sharing a secret. "Future motion," Victoria continued, "exists because children taught us what courage looks like, and because a father reminded me what leadership means." She gestured and the crowd turned as Jake, awkward in a borrowed blazer, rose to help the girls onto the cedar platform. The room adjusted around their small height. Reporters leaned forward, the way a congregation leans toward sacrament. Olivia settled in her slim chair before a keyboard with weighted keys. Lily stood beside her, hand on the walnut companion key fixed to the stand, ready to assist when Olivia's strength faded. "This piece is called Tiny Steps," Victoria said, her smile catching. "Composed by 2 7- and 8-year-old girls who prefer snack breaks to rehearsal." Laughter warmed the air. Then the first note sounded, hesitant, bell clear. The device whispered as it compensated, letting Olivia's left hand press and release with less fight. Lily, attuned to every tremor, adjusted minutely, their bodies a small choreography of trust. The melody found itself, a brave little river threading between stones. People cried the way adults do at beauty they didn't plan for, surprised by their own softness. When the piece ended, silence held the final note like a cupped palm before the atrium erupted. Victoria didn't return to the lectern. She stepped onto the platform instead and crouched so she was eye level with the girls. The microphone caught only the tail of her words. "I'm proud of you." Then she stood and faced the room. "Tonight, I'm naming Jake Miller not merely as a contributor, but as co-founder of Future Motion. His designs, built from reclaimed wood and stubborn hope, will be open-sourced for any clinic or parent to use." A murmur rolled through the crowd, the kind that accompanies a shift from business as usual to something risked and meant. Jake flushed, startled, and shook his head once as if to knock the spotlight away. It stayed. This isn't," he began. But Lily tugged his sleeve, and he closed his mouth, letting pride feel strange and good on his face. "Before you ask about numbers," Victoria said, meeting the press corps with unusual patience, "here is the only metric that matters." She turned to Olivia. "Honey, if you want to try, we're here." It was not a command or a stage cue. It was an opening. Olivia reached for the armrests. Time thinned. Jake moved instinctively to spot her. Lily braced the companion key against the frame so it wouldn't snag. Olivia planted her left foot, then the right, the effort visible in her jaw. Her body trembled the way a leaf trembles before letting go of its branch. Then, one step, a collective breath shattered into sound. Another step, smaller but surer. On the third, Lily could no longer keep from squealing. Olivia laughed, buoyed by the room, and closed the last inch into Lily's arms. The atrium stood as one, applause breaking against the glass like rain. In the back, a cameraman forgot his angle and simply watched, eyes wet, as if he'd remembered who he'd been before deadlines taught him to hurry past wonder. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. She was not the architect of this moment. She was its witness. When she lowered her fingers, she looked for Jake. He was already looking at her. In that shared glance sat all the things not yet said. "Thank you. I see you. Let's build the next thing right." On stage, Olivia turned and held up the wooden bracelet, the burned mark catching the lights like an ember that had chosen not to go out. "This," Victoria said into the microphone when the applause finally allowed breath, "is what we're funding. Not miracles, but chances. Not pity, but partnership. Not products, but belonging." She invited hospital therapists, community organizers, and parents to join them in pilot programs. A donor shouted a number. Another matched it. A software engineer in the third row raised a hand to volunteer code time. The atrium, designed for quarterly earnings and launch parties, felt suddenly like church. When the lights dimmed for a closing video, Jake slipped sideways off the platform, leaving the girls to soak their applause. He didn't like being watched for what he considered ordinary. Victoria met him at the steps. Up close, he saw the cost in her face. The nights, the bargaining with God, the brittle control finally allowed to breathe. "Thank you," she said, the two words unadorned. "For building this, for everything." "You built it," he replied. "I just made it easier to hold." Her laugh was small and surprised. Maybe that's all leadership is. The video ended to another swell of clapping. Somewhere above them, the rain began. Soft at first, then gathering. The glass trembled with it, 1,000 small hands keeping time. A year later, spring returned to Seattle with the kind of warmth that carried forgiveness in it. At the edge of the city, on 3 reclaimed acres near the lake, a new sign stood carved from cedar. Hope Garden, a space for every step. Below it, in smaller letters, were 2 names, founded by Victoria Carter and Jake Miller. The morning light spilled over the wooden archway and the beds of tulips, windmills, and play structures, all built at adjustable heights so no child was ever left watching from the sidelines. The air smelled of rain-soaked soil and lilacs. Children's laughter drifted between the raised planters, mingling with the soft hum of music from a portable speaker. Olivia sat on a low bench, her wheelchair folded beside her like a retired soldier. Her legs, though still uncertain, obeyed her more each day. She tapped rhythm on her knee while teaching a small boy how to press keys on a compact keyboard fitted with one of Jake's adaptive levers. "It's okay if you miss a note," she said, gentle but sure. "Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to start." Across the garden, Lily chased a butterfly net full of wild dandelion fluff, giggling so hard she almost tripped. Jake watched them, leaning on the fence post he'd installed himself, the scent of sawdust faint even now. Victoria arrived a moment later carrying 2 mugs of coffee, steam rising in little ghosts between them. She handed him one without words. They stood side by side, the kind of silence that had stopped being awkward months ago. "We had 20 new families apply this week," she said, scanning the garden. "Therapists from Oregon want to replicate the design. You've started a movement." Jake chuckled. "You mean we've started it?" She looked up at him, her expression soft. "I may have signed the papers, Jake, but you're the one who taught me what real rebuilding looks like." He took a sip, eyes on Olivia and Lily kneeling to plant something near the ramp. "They did most of it. We just made room." For a moment, wind lifted the petals around them, small white whirlwinds against the morning. The sight tugged at something tender in both of them. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked quietly. "The crash?" He nodded once. "Sometimes. Not the fire, just the sound right after, rain hitting metal. I remember thinking, if she makes it, I'll never waste another minute." "And have you?" He met her gaze. "Not lately." They smiled, and the stillness between them deepened, no longer heavy but rooted. A group of volunteers called Victoria over to approve the new signage near the therapy deck. She excused herself, leaving Jake by the fence. When she returned, she carried a small wooden box. "We've been working on something," she said, nodding toward Olivia and Lily. "Open it." Inside lay the bracelet, Olivia's bracelet, now fitted with a tiny clasp carved into the shape of an open flower. The burned mark still glowed dark against the lighter grain. "She wanted you to have it back," Victoria said softly. "She said it's your turn to heal too." Jake swallowed hard. "It kept her safe. It belongs with her." "Maybe," Victoria said, "but she believes healing means sharing what saved you." He slipped the bracelet on, the wood warm from her hand, the faint scent of varnish mixing with coffee. The girls ran toward them then, cheeks flushed, holding up a seed packet. "Dad! Mom! Miss Victoria!" Lily corrected herself mid-word, giggling. "We're planting a wish tree," Olivia added, "one where every kid who learns to walk again can hang a ribbon." Victoria knelt, laughing through tears. "Then we'd better plant it deep," she said. Together they dug the soil, 2 children, 2 parents, 4 hands joining around the seedling. When the roots were covered, Olivia tied a strip of blue fabric to the first branch. It fluttered in the breeze, the word hope stitched in shaky thread. Later, after the volunteers left and dusk spread its lavender calm, Victoria sat on the porch of the garden office, pen in hand. She wrote an essay for Soul and Work, the journal that had once chronicled her as a ruthless executive. The piece was titled "Seeing the Unseen." In it she wrote, "Leadership isn't power, it's presence. It's having the courage to look at what's broken and stay long enough to help it mend. Sometimes that courage comes from the smallest hands." She set the pen down and looked out the window. Jake was hanging solar lanterns along the path, their lights flickering on one by one like stars learning the order of things. The girls were chasing fireflies, their laughter rising and falling with the wind. Victoria walked down to where he stood. "We're almost out of lanterns," he said. "Then we'll make more," she replied. They stood beneath the tree they'd planted, now bearing its first green shoots, and in the soft golden light, their hands found each other without needing permission. The air smelled of cedar and rain and beginnings. The camera of the world, if it had been watching, would have seen four figures outlined in amber. Two adults who had learned to build from loss, and two children who had taught them how. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from medicine or money. It begins with a small act of courage, a hand reaching out when no one else would. That single moment turned a lonely child into a symbol of hope, and two broken families into one. Because love, in its simplest form, is just the decision to show up. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still changes lives. And tell us in the comments, what does hope look like to you?